In 2020, there were 35 countries basically at the research phase only of CBDCs, with China being the most advanced, doing a little bit of piloting. Fast forward 4 years, on 134 countries representing 98% of global GDP were at the research or later phase, and in fact, 64 were beyond research. 11 countries had actually had implemented CBDCs, and there are now more CBDC accounts than crypto accounts.
This podcast is sponsored by Coin ATM Radar. When buying crypto with cash, an ATM is much more reliable and safer than meeting some random person in a random place. And unlike an exchange, which could freeze your account, you truly own all the crypto you buy. With Coin ATM Radar, you could find crypto ATMs and other services where you can buy and sell cryptocurrencies for cash. On their website, you can search by coin, address, if the ATM supports selling as well as buying, and you can also search by geo area, country, state, city. You can also check and compare actual current fees at different ATMs. If you want to find out more, head over to coinatmradar.com, which is COINATMRADAR.com.
Hey everyone, I have the fantastic pleasure of speaking with the one and only Aaron Day, the CEO of the Daylight Freedom Foundation. How's it going, man?
It's going well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Just same old, working hard towards making sure freedom money wins out. And so we've sort of known each other, through the grapevine, through mutual circles, things like that for many years. And it hasn't really been until the last few that I feel like our paths started to converge a lot more in the whole crypto space, but not just the crypto, speculative, buying things, getting rich kind of thing, but specifically the freedom money kind of thing and the trying to live off this stuff. And especially in the context of the CBDC or central bank digital currency, a looming threat that I feel like is something where conceptually a lot of people sort of understand it's a big, bad, scary thing. But in practice, what will it mean? What's actually being worked on? Is it happening? Do we know? All that stuff has been kind of, it's not very well understood in the public, and something I've seen you talk a whole lot about. So, first, why don't you just introduce yourself in any other way than what I've already said?
Sure. I guess I'll just say, we have a lot of commonality and a lot of overlap, probably over a decade. And with Free State Project, I started out life as a serial entrepreneur. So I dropped out of college when I was 19. Started a company, sold it, then started another company in the healthcare space, which was destroyed by the government. I wasn't, unlike a lot of our friends, I wasn't actually the specific target. I was just collateral damage. Okay. This was just kind of Obamacare and Dodd-Frank and the Attorney General going after one of our vendors. All of those things coincided to destroy what was a very profitable and growing business. And so that, I would say, radicalized me for the second time. And so then I became kind of full-on liberty activist, moved to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project, and was the chair of that for a while, did a bunch of political stuff, and gave up on the political stuff in 2018, and then moved.
A good year to do it.
And then moved into crypto in 2019. I'm like, enough with this. I was already using crypto. I learned about crypto actually from Ian and Roger Veer in 2012, and I had been using it for actual transactions. I actually was using it for political activism. We had a super PAC in 2014, and we raised money in Bitcoin, and we paid volunteers in Bitcoin. And, I thought we were supposed to use the stuff. That was always my original intention. And then COVID happened. And then, I was kind of looking at, what's COVID all about? And then Ian Freeman was targeted, and then Jeremy Kauffman was targeted. I'm like, why are they going after these guys? Because they're liberty, but in the grand scheme of things, like from a dollar amount perspective, Ian's not a big enough threat to warrant a multi-year investigation. And
Jeremy, I should just interject on that. Just today, I was doing a live news show. We were talking about TD Bank getting fined $3 billion for money laundering, and small slap on the wrist compared to what they made on that. And that's like large scale money laundering for drug companies, and no one's going to prison. And then you have, as you mentioned, these small OTC cash for crypto dealers who thought they were doing everything legally. Then they're just getting targeted with like prison. It's crazy.
No two-time life sentences plus 40 years for TD Bank.
Yeah.
Shocking. And so I started looking into this, like, why is this happening? And I was at that point living on crypto, so I thought I was fairly up to speed on what was going on. And then I started looking into CBDCs. And in 2020, there were 35 countries basically at the research phase only of CBDCs, with China being the most advanced, doing a little bit of piloting. Fast forward 4 years, on 134 countries representing 98% of global GDP were at the research or later phase, and in fact 64 were beyond research. 11 countries had actually had implemented CBDCs, and there are now more CBDC accounts than crypto accounts. And I'm like, wow. So if you look at the growth of that, I'm like, okay, that's a problem. And then I saw that President Biden signed this executive order 14067, which really did two things. It authorizes the government to pursue a CBDC while also taking a whole of government approach of regulating all other digital assets, which is what they've been doing, which is why a lot of the people that we know are in prison and all of these exchanges are being sued. So in essence, they're going after crypto because they don't want competition. And then I started studying it more. I mean, I can go into all kinds of different levels. We can go to all kinds of different avenues with this. The most recent conclusion that I've come to, though, is that this is all a semantic argument. We already have a CBDC. And this is probably the most important thing. I'm working on, I put out a couple of drafts, but I'm saying kind of like you have the DEFCON 5 chart.
Yeah.
I'm saying that we have like, a 5-tier system of shades of tyranny, and that we're already kind of at a 3. And I say that in that our money is already digital. 92% of our money is digital. Money is created when the federal government issues an IOU to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve creates money out of thin air, literally in an Oracle database. So if somebody was to ask me what a central bank digital currency is, well, I would say the Federal Reserve creating digital currency in an Oracle database actually meets the grammatic definition.
Yeah, of course, because it's a central bank issued currency in a digital form.
So I think most people don't think of it that way. And then I really started looking at, well, who's defining it? What is the official definition? And it turns out there isn't an official definition. These different groups, the WEF might have one definition. The Bank of International Settlements has another. Then you have the World Bank. So there's no commonly agreed to. So then I've started looking at all these other things. And so when you talk about a CBDC, assuming people have even heard of it, well, what are they worried about? They're worried about tracking. They're worried about censorship. They're worried about programmability. Those are basically the 3 big functions. And so then I drilled into that a little bit. And this stuff is actually kind of horrifying. And I don't even know if this is probably not even a complete list. So far, I've found 13 government programs involving the surveillance of United States citizens' financial transactions. And I mean, I won't go through all of them, but I'll give you 3 as an example that are bad enough. The IRS is working with banks using AI to analyze people's financial transactions. So I would say that's pretty bad, right? Bulk data collection through the NSA. And then through the Patriot Act, they actually issue things called national security letters. And this is where they can come in and say, hey, you know what? We're going to shut down your bank account. We're going to shut off access to funding. They didn't need to get a warrant, and you can't talk to anybody about it, including a lawyer, right? So those are just 3 of the 13 that I've found so far. So when Americans are like, and I see these politicians on both sides, Ted Cruz and Elizabeth Warren will go out and, Elizabeth Warren wants a CBDC, but she will claim that she is concerned about surveillance of financial transactions. And Ted Cruz will go out and say he's against CBDCs and he's against, financial surveillance. And yet they both voted to reauthorize the Patriot Act. They've both voted for things that actually added the surveillance that I talk about in the current system. So we have surveillance.
Yeah.
And it's okay. How about programmability? Well, first of all, so the Federal Reserve is an Oracle database, and then commercial banks also have their own databases. And some people like to say, well, what's different about it is, there's a central bank, but commercial banks also have their own database, as if that's an important distinction, because
just means it's a 2-part. It's like a joint two things joined together, but it's kind of the same thing.
It's indistinguishable. And so who owns the central bank? So I'm kind of like, is this really what people are concerned about, whether or not the Federal Reserve issues digital currency to commercial banks, or they provide reserves and the commercial banks create their own digital currency? I don't think that's what people think about as being the distinction, right? That, in fact, I know it's not, because I've not heard anybody articulate that as being the main concern. In fact, there's some reasons to say, if you're going to have a digital system, you can still have commercial banks. It might even make sense to have the central bank issue the token. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But on the programmability front, I mean, people have, HSA cards and flexible spending accounts for healthcare purchases, right?
Yeah.
And these are cards that the largest provider of this is Optum Bank. They have 5 million customers. So Optum Bank, it is a bank. Well, how do HSAs work? They're cards that you can use with your bank, where you can only buy certain healthcare products at certain times from certain vendors. Well, that's programmable money with the current
so they have to
system.
know what those things are at the point of sale, and to be able to know whether to authorize or decline the payment at that time.
Yeah, so it's a whitelist, right? So this is a whitelist. If it's not on the whitelist, you can't buy this. And there's all kinds of, fraud detection. There's all kinds of programmability. Programmability is not necessarily a bad thing, but the important point is MasterCard
who's doing the programming? That's the important thing.
Who's doing the program? MasterCard has a product called Doconomy. There's a Doconomy branded MasterCard that tracks your carbon usage and shuts off based on hitting certain thresholds.
Yeah, I thought I heard about that being explored. I didn't remember that it actually got deployed, but if so, that's, it's no good.
Well, it's no good. No, actually, when you dig into it, MasterCard has relationships with 150 companies where they're mostly WEF partner companies, where they're tracking carbon. So BMW, you can go through the list. I went through the list. I'm like, they're not even hiding it. MasterCard glorifies this partner program for tracking all of this stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, so we have digital programmable money. Guess what? Oracle databases and Microsoft databases are programmable. They've been programmable for a long time. So if the money can be tracked and it's programmable, and the initial root of it is the central bank. So my conclusion that I came to is we already have a central bank digital currency. Now, again, it's what is the level of tyranny? And the worst case scenario, and this is the direction that they're going, the intent for this is one global digital currency that's backed by energy credits. This has been the move of the technocracy movement since the 1930s. That's the direction they're going. So under their model, there's one currency, it's tied to energy credits, and it's also tied to social credit scores. Cash is banned, crypto is banned, and that is essentially the only form of money. So if there's this DEFCON model for CBDC tyranny, I think there's a similar model that we should construct for, okay, well, what's our solution? What are our freedom alternatives? Because we're not going to get to everybody using peer-to-peer privacy coins without any intermediaries as the first step. Just like they're kind of climbing a ladder, we're climbing a ladder. And so I think if we can start looking at it that way, we'll have a lot of success in understanding what we're up against, and also understanding how we're trying to navigate and move solutions.
Yeah, so when people think about CBDCs, and I've kind of made a similar point before, that we are using a central bank currency that is digital and has a lot of these elements of restrictions and programmability and social scores and things like that. Still, the average person, I would say the average freedom lover, says that CBDCs are coming. There's still this concept of they're coming. So I guess for as bad as it is now, what else is being worked on, or how much worse can it get? Like, is this just going to be, they're going to keep on fine-tuning the mechanisms that are already there to make them worse? Or is there an actual new blockchain that's going to be launched in a completely new government-controlled currency? Is it going to be just regulated stablecoins on existing networks like Ethereum? Like, what in the future is being worked on that could be potentially, I guess, a lot worse than what we have right now?
It can get a lot worse. And they've already developed the technology and are piloting the technology that is much worse. And it's really been only in the last probably 60 days that I've written a couple of articles about this to try to put some clarity in this. And one of the things that helped me helps me try to explain it, although I don't know how effective it is yet, is people have to first understand that all modern commerce runs through databases.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So money itself is a centralized database, Oracle. But if you are buying, cars, if you're buying houses, if you're buying stocks, the statement of truth for these transactions resides in a centralized database. This is basically, and each industry has its own set of databases or single database or whatever it happens to be. But it's important to understand that databases are at the heart of commerce. And then there's a problem with centralized databases, which is they can be hacked. They can be wiped out completely. I mean, there are all kinds of security issues. There are data integrity issues. I think in 2017, there were $1.5 trillion in economic losses due to issues related to databases. This is expected to grow to like over $10 trillion in the coming years. And when you look at that, and by the way, I mean, we've all experienced this, the Social Security database a few weeks ago. I don't know how many services that I use. I've got like almost every service you get a notification. And so centralized databases are problematic. And so what that means is that, an evolution to that is, in a way of looking at CBDCs, are just a tokenized form of money, with the idea being that, tokens are, it depends on how they're implemented, but are an upgrade to the security model of centralized databases. But tokens can be either, tyrannical, or they can be, freedom promoting. And what a lot of people don't realize, and this is to me the most horrifying thing of all. So if CBDCs are tokenized money only represents 5% of global assets. The other 95% are, stocks, bonds. Actually, the largest chunk are derivatives, believe it or not, like $1.2 quadrillion. But your house, your car, computers, everything is an asset. That makes up the other 95%. What they are building is a system, a platform, where they're going to have CBDCs, which are tokenized money, and then they're going to digitize and tokenize all of our other assets and put it on the same platform, meaning that all of our assets, monetary and non-monetary assets, will have the same programmability, the same trackability, and the same censorability. This is how we will own nothing. This is essentially how this works. And where it's really frightening is there are big plans to do this with stocks and bonds and 401ks first. I actually talked to a developer at the Federal Reserve of New York who actually told me that the plan is to roll out a new US CBDC with something called Regulated Liability Network, which is this platform for other tokenized assets. They're going to roll it out at the same time. Now, here's the thing. And this has been a challenge for people, even in the Liberty space, because you'll talk to a lot of people, you probably experience this as well. Oh, well, the government, they suck. Obamacare website, they're never going to be able to implement a CBDC. It's an insurmountable technological issue. The government isn't developing the CBDC. It is actually the most well-funded banks funding the smartest developers. And in the case of the U.S. retail CBDC pilot, it's called Project Hamilton, and this is a project between the MIT and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and it has a Bitcoin core developer on the white paper. In fact, a Bitcoin core developer who worked on SegWit and Lightning also is the co-author of the U.S. retail CBDC pilot. That other thing I was talking about for the non-monetary assets, that platform, it's called Regulated Liability Network. Mike Hearn, who was an early Bitcoin developer.
I remember him when he rage quit.
Yeah, when he rage quit. So he's
with good reason.
With good reason, but yet now he's the chief platform officer for the thing that's being used to centrally tokenize all global assets. And so this is challenging.
That's quite the story, right? It's quite the about face from being one of the key architects of freedom money back in the super early days to becoming disillusioned because of where it went and moving on. I kind of always wonder what he was up to today. And it is very disappointing to know that now he's kind of become something worse than what he was sort of standing against, it seemed.
Yeah, and I don't know how that transition went, or whether he thinks he's a white hat. I don't even know. I think it's going to be interesting to dig into that. But here's the problem. So when I mentioned that the idea is a single global currency, So the US has a regulated liability network and a CBDC that they're working on. So does Europe, so does Japan, so does the UK, and they're designing these to be interoperable, which means at the end of this process, what you have is all global digital money and digital assets on one common platform. So truly, this is how you get to this centralized authoritarian system. So it gets worse. And this system, this Project Hamilton, is now up to 1.8 million transactions per second. So when you compare that to, Bitcoin, that's still at 7 and, whatever, Lightning is a failed experiment, but it can handle a lot of transactions. Now, the current system, before FedNow, the Federal Reserve System was only 1,000 transactions per second. But that's just the Federal Reserve. You do have all of these other banks that have their own databases, and some large commercial banks like a JP Morgan may do 40,000, 50,000 transactions per second. When I started studying, this was really fascinating for me to study. I guess each bank tends to have 5 or 6 different databases to handle different things, and then you total all the thing up, and there are 60,000 centralized databases powering global banking. And it's amazing that any of this works, actually. After going through that, I'm like, wow, okay, this has a lot of points of failure. But you might ask, well, why do you need 1.8 million transactions per second? Because we're not anywhere near that, right? Well, if all of a sudden this system is used for the entire supply chain, where you're actually tracking everything, not just monetary transactions, then that's how you could see 1.8 million transactions per second actually being the kind of scale that you might need if you were truly going to track everything on one system. So it does get worse. It gets a lot worse, but it's bad enough now. In fact, what it is now is it is today what people fear it will be in the future. They can't even conceive of what we're talking about now with all of these other things yet. That's not even in their realm of possibility of how bad it could get. And so people should exit the system now. And I've been adamant about this in as many different ways as possible. It's like, hey, if you don't like war, if you don't like all the stuff that's going on, stop using the dollar. There isn't a path to fix the dollar. I've studied fiat currencies. There's no historical precedent of reforming a currency when it gets to,
of course,
where we are. We're not going back on the gold standard. That's not, there's no sound money solution here. And so we just need to stop using it. But I'll tell you, it's a challenge. There's so much education that has to take place.
Yeah, we definitely need to move forward in some way that's to better alternatives. Thankfully, we have them. But just sort of to recap the whole CBDC picture. So right now, there's a bunch of maybe more old school databases that are sort of linked together, whether it's, the Federal Reserve database, and then you connect to different banks and card companies, et cetera, that then do tracking through that. And it's kind of all, and then that's just for money, for payments. And then when it comes to stocks and other assets, you have a bunch of other institutions that have that. And it's not all connected. It's kind of like a patchwork of things that they've sort of tried to connect a little bit, but it's kind of a little janky. And then the kind of idea is to modernize all these payment rails, but more importantly, put all the payment rails on one rail, and then tokenize all the other assets that aren't on payment rails currently, put them on the same rails. So they have one system where you get to track every single movement of value and program it and control it all across the world. Is that kind of the grand vision we're kind of seeing?
That is the grand vision, and people don't believe me. Just go Google regulated liability network. You can actually see their white paper. All of this stuff is public. There's no I'm not theorizing any of this. You can type in Project Hamilton. You can see the white paper, and then you can dig, and all of this stuff is available. The regulated liability network is probably the most horrifying one, because what it talks about is the fact that crypto is a threat, and we need to keep all the economics in this contained system based on, it's called regulated liability network, central bank liability. So the whole system is designed towards the global economy continuing this liability system through central banks, as opposed to any decentralized solutions. And there are quotes in there in the white paper from various bankers, like some guy from VP from Wells Fargo, and you look at these quotes, I'm like, how does no one know about this? And by the way, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never met anybody that's heard about it. And the people involved in this regulated liability network, it's the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, It's MIT. By the way, MIT is involved in all three major US CBDC pilots. They have ties. The guy that was running this when all these were kicked off is a guy named Joy Ito, who did have ties to Epstein. Like, it gets worse. It gets really bad. The more you dig into it, it's just not, it's gross after a while. But the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, 5 of the largest New York banks, the Bank of International Settlements, I think even DTCC, which is a company that's involved in stock. Stocks are a whole other thing. I mean, you were right when you said you have all these different databases, but what a lot of people don't realize is our stock market runs on very archaic systems. I mean, it takes like 3 days to settle a transaction, and there are all these intermediaries in there, and they don't want to be disintermediated. They make a lot of money by having systems that are, not ironclad and not on, immutable ledgers. They make a lot of money. In fact, they may make, as it turns out, more of their margin on things like naked short selling and some of these other things. So there's going to be huge resistance from everybody. But you would say, well, okay, again, tokenization isn't bad. People will make the argument of, well, all right, we have centralized databases now. If they move to this new system and it's tokenized, wouldn't that be better? But what's interesting is the intermediaries that are involved now are involved in the token system. So when you look at regulated liability network, they're going to actually add more third parties. So you're going to have tokenization, but now you're going to have more third parties involved in being able to kind of monitor and control these systems. And so that, at least if you appreciate liberty, is not the direction we want to go in.
Yeah. And so I guess by having it on just one network, like what are the primary benefits of something like Bitcoin is it's radical transparency of the network, where you could see how much money is out there, all that kind of big movements. And as it's become a less effective digital cash over the years, it's actually become kind of easier to surveil, I guess. And one of the biggest benefits is that, for example, if your company has a big balance in Bitcoin, you can just say, here's the address. You can just see it at all times. And so I guess it's sort of like that for every single financial asset out there, except just all in one spot, where all these different parties have a lot of, they could benefit a lot, from being able to just collect all the data of everything that's happening and kind of be parties to that.
Yeah, but if these systems that they're building are not permissionless, and so it turns out that it isn't going to be a completely transparent network, and it's not going to have all of those attributes. Which is, I understand the argument of, it's like, hey, if it's transparent for everybody, then that could be a good thing if everybody bought into that. Unfortunately, I have yet to see a CBDC design or implementation that is actually transparent and permissionless. So we're getting the worst part of it, and then everybody else has Bitcoins. So now private people have something that can be surveilled, but the new system that they're developing cannot. And so now it's worked against us, which is very unfortunate. And why a lot of people, I think a lot of people thought mistakenly that Bitcoin was anonymous. I think Ross Ulbricht thought it was anonymous, and others in the Liberty community. And now we know with chain analysis that that's clearly not the case. It's a decentralized ledger. You can make it anonymous, but the extra steps involved, and just based on the history of it and everything else, a lot of people have not done that.
Yeah.
And now it's turning out, like in the case of Roger Ver, now they're going after people retroactively for taxes when there wasn't a clear ruling on what Bitcoin was. People weren't even paying taxes. And when you consulted an accountant and lawyers at the time, and you even got guidance and complied with it, they're now trying to retroactively go back and say, well, that wasn't what you should have done, and trying to throw you in prison for that.
Yeah.
So
it's like a giant data mine now.
Yep.
So within just the whole CBDC world, where all this stuff is being built, all these people are clearly working on this together. There's a surprising number of people involved. In all of that, is there any pushback on that side of things? Like, is there anyone in the banking sector or in this tech sector that is just saying, like, no, I don't like that, we shouldn't do this, or arguing like, oh, that'll ruin my business model as a bank that does this? Is there, obviously the freedom advocates would have issue with all this, but as far as just in that world, is there any pushback, or is it just kind of like everyone sees this as a good thing and is pushing it forward?
we don't see, or I don't, you don't see publicly the debates about what's going on, because a lot of that is behind the scenes. And part of the problem with this is so the level of knowledge about this is low. I saw a Cato report, and I think half of Americans have not still even heard of a CBDC. And
Wow.
and part of this is with the propaganda. When you see the chair of the Federal Reserve, he'll come out and say, well, we don't really know if we're going to explore a CBDC, and yet they've been working on it since 2015. So there's it's complete propaganda in terms of they're saying, well, we're going to take a wait and see approach, and meanwhile there are 3 pilots going on, and there's more code and more stuff going on than there is in Bitcoin, for instance. And so so I don't know what the behind the scenes conversations are. I mean, you see different segments. I mean, if a banker says something, if somebody from Citibank says something, are they representing all of Citibank, or is this one person's opinion? So you will certainly see different opinions. You'll even see certain Fed governors, come out against CBDCs. But I now question everything in terms of, well, they may say that, but again, every time I hear somebody say that, it's like hearing politicians. I mean, I ran for president to raise awareness on this issue, which was weird because I was just trying to get into the debates, and I couldn't even get people to poll, which I would have thought based on previous stuff I could have at least gotten. I couldn't even get any people that had previously interviewed me to talk about this, which was really weird, to be honest. But I did talk to like Vivek Ramaswamy. He read my book. I talked to other politicians, and the politicians are clueless about this. I mean, they are truly clueless.
Yeah.
About how the existing system works and even what CBDCs are. I mean, Ted Cruz put in a anti-CBDC bill claiming that he thought the Federal Reserve was going to preemptively implement a CBDC. And I'm kind of like, okay, well, all of the surveillance things that we don't like, the Federal Reserve didn't. I don't like the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a Ponzi scheme that shouldn't exist, but they're not the ones putting in the surveillance. It's Congress that's putting in the surveillance. He signed some of the bills. So now I was going to do a whole thing outlining all of these crypto bills, because then there's this whole Republican versus Democrat thing. And I actually put this into the index as well. People are like, well, the Republicans are going to be anti-CBDC. And I get very frustrated with Cynthia Loomis, right? So she's this senator from Wyoming with laser eyes, and everybody's like, oh, wow, she's great. She hates privacy. She stated it explicitly. The legislation that she's put together will ban algorithmic stablecoins. It's basically setting it up so that Tether's going to go away, and it's going to give stablecoins to basically large regulated banks in the United States. Well, okay, so what is a stablecoin? A stablecoin is a form of digital programmable money. Well, okay, isn't that kind of a CBDC? Like, that's not a pro-freedom stance. The Democrats are more okay, we're on the side of this central bank issues the digital currency. And I want to make something clear. Under no model that's been implemented anywhere do commercial banks go away. A lot of people think a central bank digital currency means you will only work with the Federal Reserve and banks will go away. There's no implementation that even contemplates that.
Yeah, they got to make all their supporters happy.
Exactly. So I have not seen a single bill in Congress that lowers the CBDC tyranny index. They just have different approaches to adding tyranny. And a Republican will say that, well, we're pro-bank, therefore we're pro-business, and somehow being pro-bank is anti-central bank, and that somehow is capitalism. And it's a weird, distorted message.
Yeah, it is pretty crazy. It's so I've noticed this as well with the topic of CBDCs is very popular amongst I would call it the conservative fringe, like the Republican side of things. That's very much more conspiratorial and Trumpist and all that kind of stuff. But it's extremely unfocused, where it's just one currency that's censorable like China. We don't want that, so we're going to put a law in banning it. And I've seen a lot of different bills. I've even testified on some bills, I've testified on some bills in New Hampshire that have been talking about this and tried to ban it, that, I guess through the best of intentions, that have ended up having wording that would end up banning all crypto, for example, that they don't even know because they don't really know what they're dealing with to begin with. And so there's a lot of virtue signal CBDC bans floating around there that at the end of the day, because they haven't been defined, they just won't really do anything, and there will be a flow around that.
Well, and there's another thing that people talk about in a lot of those same circles, which is, oh, we should use cash more. So let's have, Cash Fridays. So we're gonna only, go to restaurants and go to shops using cash. And at the end of the day, once you understand that, this currency is in this Oracle database and these databases, paper money is just a tokenized database liability, right? So it doesn't change the fact that the underlying problem that we have is the fiat currency itself. If you have a paper token or a digital token, yes, it's true that the paper token isn't as trackable yet, but there are serial numbers on the paper, and they're actually adding nanotechnology and even RFID. So I guarantee you there's going to be a point moving forward where it's like if you have physical cash, it's going to be almost as traceable as a digital tokenized form.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing is I obviously far prefer cash over, I mean, I don't really use it because I don't really have fiat, but whenever I have to use something like fiat, I far prefer cash. However, I do notice a lot of people sort of almost like people get into gold again, thinking that's going to help them. I do see a lot of like trying to like move back and like, no, let's make sure that we don't get rid of cash. But at the same time, it's still heavy focus on a government issued currency that could be changed or reprinted or extra tracking put in or anything else at any point.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, I mean, I like gold backs. I do like gold backs. But there's a lot of people are like, oh yeah, let's go back to the gold standard. Again, the problem is the state involvement in money. I don't care if you have precious metals or not. I mean, by the end of the Roman Empire, a silver denarius was 0.05% silver. Do we think the politicians are more moral today or more fiscally responsible today than they were then? I mean, I don't see any evidence of it. So somebody said to me, it's like, oh, hey, Zimbabwe is going on the gold standard. I'm like, okay, let me know how that works out, right? I mean, so but again, and Henry Ford said this. He said, if the American people understood the financial system, there'd be riots in the streets in the morning, and they don't. People are not taught how money works at all. What counts as fiscal conservatism is whether or not you can do addition and subtraction to keep track of a Ponzi scheme. Like that's actually what qualifies as financial literacy by most people, not the fact that the fiat. So you've got to separate money and state, but there's so many steps to get from where people are to even understanding what I just said as a concept.
Yeah. So then where do we go from there? I mean, obviously, I've been on my own little rabbit hole trying to live on crypto for, the last 9 years or so. You've been doing the same thing. How do we get the rest of people trying to do this? Like, what are some steps that you think that people should be trying to do?
So here's where I've come to with this, and it's been an evolution. And so this is what I'm going to try next, but
Yes.
and we'll see. Here's what I found. Here's the encouraging part. Because of COVID and because of the fact that the dollar's lost 25% of its purchasing power since 2020, more people are asking questions about the Federal Reserve. More people are curious and interested in pursuing other alternatives. So I do these workshops all over the country. And the thing is, the average demographic, like they're boomers. They're largely boomers. These are people that 7 years ago, we would have been like, there's no way these people are going to be interested in this. And so you have so there's like this set, and I've identified 20 different categories, but I mean, you look at Operation Choke Point, and there's like this section of people in the health freedom space, food freedom space, Second Amendment space. There's like a whole cluster of 20 different groups of people where they already know the government has or is targeting their financial services, right? So they're already open. They're already at the point where like, okay, I know we need a solution, right? And so, but what's interesting is it's tough trying to onboard 100 boomers at one time to crypto. Like I will tell you, so it should be easier. And so part of this is, and I say this, it's kind of, people use digital currency all the time. The problem isn't the fact that it's digital. The problem is the fact that crypto hasn't focused on user interface.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so where I've gotten is I've been trying to move towards, here's what I want my workshops to be. I want to be able to get people onboarded with a wallet that's easy to use. And then I want to be able to onboard merchants. I want merchants to be able to actually integrate the ability to take crypto so that by the end of the workshop, there are newly onboarded people buying from merchants that are newly onboarded. If we could get the workshops to that point, because you know how hard it is as you like go through these different stuff. Oh, how many people do you talk to? Oh, I've got a wallet. I don't know what any of the, I don't know how many people I've talked to that they have crypto in a wallet, but they don't even know that it could be used as a currency. Most people out there don't even know that they don't think about, oh, it's just crypto, not cryptocurrency. They're not even aware of that.
I've had this happen before with people who are crypto people, I would say, like they work in the crypto industry, or they're just big nerds and fans of it and holders and things like that, and people who are very intelligent having conceptual conversations on the subject. And then they come and visit, and then we go to some place and I'm like, hey, you could pay with crypto here. You want to try it out? And like 8 out of 10 have never had a phone wallet. They just have never had it on their phone. And so they just have no ability to do it. Or they do have a phone wallet, but they have nothing on it. Or in a couple of cases, they do have, something in a portfolio thing that they can, if you give them 10, 15 minutes, then they'll get it into a spendable state there. But yeah, it's like, those are the cream of the crop almost, as far as like an experience where almost everyone has crypto at the ready to be sent and knows how to do it and is kind of familiar with the QR code scanning and what they can and can't pay and things like that. It's like very few and far between these days.
Very much so. So where I've settled, so I'll give you an example of the most recent thing that I did. And I do want to say to everybody that's listening to this, so I tell people, because when I say, I've been living on crypto since 2019, and people are like, oh, well, that's not even possible. I actually bring you up all the time. I'm like, I know this guy, and he's been doing it since 2015. And I interviewed you, I think, in 2020. When code was going on. And a great fan of all of the work that you've done. And in fact, I even follow some of this. I've implemented some of the recent stuff that you've put out there. So we just onboarded yesterday a company called CannaSense. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
No, but I bet it's in the cannabis industry.
It is. It's some interest. I don't know that much about the business. It's some collective where you can buy medicinal stuff, and I'm not. I don't use it, but in any event, apparently it's a pretty large operation. So, and I'm going through this process, and it's a pretty large business. He has to pay all of his employees, and so he's not ready to be in a position where now all of a sudden he's going to pay all of his employees and all of his vendors directly with crypto. So, I implemented Now Payments as the kind of point of sale, because he's using WooCommerce. Is kind of getting into the weeds, but it plugs into his existing. He's got a WordPress site, and the way Now Payments works is you select which cryptos you want to take, and then it'll convert it to a single reference crypto of your choosing. So, for instance, you could pick Dash, you could pick stablecoin, you could pick whatever it is. And I walked through this with him, and I walked through. I'm like, well, look, if you pick BTC or Ethereum, it could have an impact on your fees depending on what happens, and there's a lot of unknowns here. And so we basically narrowed it down to a selection of cryptos. Dash is on the list amongst others that have low enough fees where as a business owner, he doesn't have to worry about like am I going to actually have negative gross margins because I picked the wrong crypto.
Yeah.
Now in this case, and every merchant that I talk to says this, they're worried about crypto because of the volatility of the price. And so, what I set up for him was, a USDC Polygon stablecoin. And I picked that so that we can use Spritz Finance so that he can offboard to his bank. So we went through that whole process, but now he's able to take these cryptos, and we walked through the entire experience. And so now this merchant is able to take Monero and a handful of other coins, and going through a few steps, and we actually calculated through all the fees and interchanges and everything to go to Spritz Finance, he paid 2.25%, so less than what he would pay for a credit card, and now he's unlocked a whole new set of payments. So that was pretty cool. Like that was actually, now it actually took way longer to onboard him. Like there's a lot that can be streamlined with that. And I've been recommending Cake Wallet and using Cake Wallet because it has multiple cryptocurrencies, has privacy cryptos, which I've become obsessed with just based on what the government is doing.
Of course.
And you can do things within the wallet. They have something called Cake Pay, so you can buy gift cards. So like the other day, I mean, I took the kids. We went, school clothes shopping. We went to a restaurant. We went to a movie. I used 4 different gift certificates in one day with Monero and Cake Pay, and it was really cool. So there's kind of now again, this isn't direct peer-to-peer commerce. These are still intermediaries. Mm-hmm. And so like there's that DEFCON 5 chart for freedom, like the Gulch level is kind of the top tier that you want to get to. We're not there yet, but I can buy gift certificates for retail transactions. I can use Spritz Finance to pay bills and to off ramp if I need to, or and my preference is to work with vendors. And since we're in New Hampshire, we have the advantage of there actually being vendors that we can use directly.
Yeah, and part of that is because it's a lot of small businesses, like where the owner will actually be in there, so you can actually get to them. And it's also a lot of, I would say well off is the right term, but it's not like dying by the margins on the day-to-day. There's a lot of businesses that are in the red for half the year until tourist season comes. They have the flexibility. And then there's just also that independent streak where people will be like willing to hear out things they will go outside of a box. And so we are kind of blessed to have that, I have to say.
We are, and that's so when I tell people about this, I'm like, okay, so, and I'm trying to move more and more to that. So, I want when I'm here, I want a higher percentage of direct peer-to-peer, but I'm okay with accepting. And I mean, it took me a while to get there. It's like, okay, listen, this is a process. This is a continuum. So, I'm not going to get down on the fact that, yeah, all right, I'm using a lot of these intermediaries now. It's like, you're not going to go from point A to point Z in one step. So I'm shifting the balance. One thing that I'm interested in now in exploring is a gold-backed privacy stablecoin, because again, merchants are worried about the volatility of crypto, but they're also worried about the volatility of the dollar. And so, and I'm working on some models where it's like, okay, if you could work with 15 different gold vaults in 15 different countries, where you could track the actual supply, where you can redeem. If you want to redeem for the gold, you can, but presumably people will not want to unless they don't think they can redeem for the gold. And then you actually have a privacy coin that you can use with Monero, basically on Xano, a tokenized system. Okay, I've talked to merchants. Merchants are interested in that. So the biggest issue for merchants is, again, the volatility. So, but they do want to take alternate payments, and they are worried about the dollar. So I think like now payments, if you're taking multiple cryptos and then it resolves to a privacy gold-backed stablecoin, that's an interesting proposition for merchants.
Yeah, it's kind of it's in a weird situation where, for me, for example, in my priorities, I want digitally scarce, decentralized to the max everything, and I just roll with that, and goes up, goes down, who cares? But then when you start to get into real people, I'm not like a fake person like me, but like real normal people who have to use the stuff, and then there's so many different concerns. And as you mentioned, like crypto's great, but way too volatile for people to just rely on. So you want some dollar denominated thing, but then people don't want to lose all this money to inflation. So you have to have something else. And there is really no perfect kind of solution. There kind of has to be like people like me who have a much more simplistic personal outlook on things. It's a lot easier to solve our problems. But then when you start trying to solve other people's problems, then you run into these things. And so when you're trying to do all this, first of all, how successful have you been? And second, do you think, is this like what's going to work at scale, this kind of approach of just set people up with some wallets, show them how to earn, and then set merchants up with like something like Now Payments, for example?
It's been an iterative process. So what I will say is there's huge demand. So I mean, I have on our website, we have like 15 different cities where there's all this demand to hold these events. And what I've actually said is for 2 reasons. One, they've been successful in that people show up and people go through the onboarding process. But do I think there's a lot of follow through after the fact? I don't, because the solutions haven't been good. So or sticky enough. So what I'm doing is I'm putting off doing more workshops until the point of sale part of it is done, and I'm waiting for Xano to be integrated into Cake Wallet, which should happen actually today, so that I can do what I said, which is I think if I could do a workshop where at the end people are actually buying from a merchant directly using crypto, that to me is the next point. Is that the ultimate solution? I'm not going to state. I do not have an ultimate solution. I have a next step in an iterative process. However, if you did that, then I like doing the workshops in person, because I will tell you, and by the way, like bringing in a dev from CakePay, devs have not sat down with customers. So you get devs in front of 100 boomers. Then then they realize, okay, these people don't understand what a seed, the wallet doesn't describe. We understand what seed phrases are and everything else, but somebody else is like, what even is this? And you don't even have a description in it in the process, right? Like the just a few small tweaks can actually, in terms of explanation, just through the guidance process, would make a world difference, right?
It's kind of funny. Like an anecdote I tell on that whole thing is my own dear mother, who's an extremely intelligent individual and has 2 master's degrees, etc. I set her up with a ledger, and I said, okay, here you go. Now it's time to write down your recovery phrase, your words. She said, I already did. I says, what do you mean you did? We didn't get to that step yet. She's like, no, I wrote them down. He says, no, you wrote these ones down? He's like, no, I wrote my own down. And I'm just like, oh, like, that's not, you can't just write whatever words. You have to write the ones they give you, or it doesn't get your money back. But just that basic understanding that a lot of us who've been crypto native for so long just understand, the rest of the world just does not understand. And it's a hurdle to get over.
It's a hurdle, but we can fix it with the UI. So my belief is with the Cake thing plus the now payments thing is going to be a great next step, and then refine, and then ultimately the workshops are good for the in-person hands-on experience. Nothing beats that data, but then you could make this online, right?
Yeah,
so you could onboard a whole bunch of people at once, but I wouldn't scale what I have right now at all. Why? And I'll tell you why, because it means that many more people sending me emails and sending me text messages asking questions. That's the great point for me where I know whether it's working or not, which is based on how many queries I get after the fact, right? So it's almost solving my own problem. It's like, okay, this is a pain. I have to keep answering this question over and over again. Let's fix the root of that problem, and then we'll do another workshop, and then we'll see. So, but I think we can get there actually doing that. But part of it is, I think it's a combination. Like, we have to have a multi-coin approach for a whole variety of reasons. One is, if they're building an 1.8 million transaction per second system, we don't have a 1.8 million transaction blockchain.
Yeah, some of the better ones could be like a couple thousand per second or something, but that's like bleeding edge tech even.
Yeah, so that's bleeding edge tech. So there's that, and then there's the amount of buying power. And I don't think that it's a gold and silver versus crypto. I think that there is this hybrid model, and I'm trying to figure out how do you work on it. You know, obviously governments don't do well with this, but could you come up with a way to have decentralized vaults where you could audit it properly, where that could back a token, so it's precious metal based currency, but it's separated from state. And again, I'm not proposing that as the solution. I'm proposing that as one of many coins as part of a multi-asset approach. I think those things get there. And I will tell you, boomers like that idea. And a lot of new merchants really like that idea. So you could get people on board with this. So I think the question is what I'm describing. Can we do it fast enough? Can we make incremental change fast enough to get it to the point where it can scale before they shut everything down? That's the race, and I can't answer that. The only thing that we can do is go as fast as we possibly can. That's the conclusion I've come to. But at least there is something. There's a path.
Yeah. So, and this is maybe in crypto, depending on who you talk to, this could be, even people who are aligned on what we believe in, could be a controversial point or point of discussion. But so, for example, one thing first off, what I've noticed is over the years, living on crypto has gotten easier and easier every year. However, it's gotten easier because the consumer-facing intermediary services have gotten better and more numerous. So there's tons of gift card for crypto options. There's multiple bill pay services that will work with that. There's reloadable crypto cards. There's a bunch of other things. It's easier than ever, but again, in none of these cases am I giving an individual crypto, then that's what they have. It's all these situations were like that. So obviously it's in the perfect versus the good, right? Don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. How much value do you see onboarding people to having all their money in crypto and all their payments using crypto, but through these kinds of systems if they can't get the mom and pop kind of thing or the direct peer-to-peer thing going?
Well, I think as long as there's a path to moving, like even like I said, like I have a certain percentage that's direct peer-to-peer. It's certainly not 100% because I travel a lot. It couldn't be 100%. And so, but I guess it's how you educate them. But I also think that there's a component of this where I said before, there are these like 20 different categories. Farmers are a huge one, right? You think about food, you think about the basics, you think about when they go to ratchet up that level of tyranny to an unacceptable level, which I mean, for us, it already is, but to where people would even understand that it is. Do we have enough merchants that provide core necessities like food and the basics? Yeah. Do we have a network of merchants built out like that where somebody can say, okay, they're offering me, either I take CBDCs with some UBI or I lose everything. Are we able to provide something where they look at that and they say, oh, okay, well, I can actually live in this merchant ecosystem? So it's about aligning the right set of merchants. And I've been talking to people a lot about just basic adoption curves for technology.
Yeah, of course.
And it's because here, I don't know if you've found this, but a lot of times I'll be like, well, I live on crypto, or you'll show somebody this, and their response is, the mainstream will never adopt that. My aunt would never do that. My mom would never do that. And so then all of a sudden it's like they shut down.
Yeah.
And what I say is, so now we're 15 years in, and you would think that we would be further along in the adoption curve. We're not, because of the hijacking of Bitcoin and everything being splintered into 20,000 pieces and whatever. That's a whole separate conversation. But let's just say we're back at square one. But we need to be focusing on the innovators, which is 2.5%, right? Then you go to early adopters, which is 13.5%, then early majority. This is just standard. It's not only standard for technology adoption, even idea adoption, even the foundation of the U.S. itself. It's not like the U.S. was founded with 50% plus one saying, we're going to, participate in the American Revolution. It was actually that same kind of sliding scale. So we need to just say, look, let's get the food freedom people, the health freedom people, all of these 20 categories together and work together. And then as a group, refine the product so that when we're going to the early majority, we have something that's competitive to what is being offered with CBDCs. Because if it's more expensive and it's harder to use, I mean, we should just say as a group, of alternative assets, we have to compete. And if our product isn't as good, we should not expect to win. And I will tell you, I think, are you going to Monerotopia?
I don't know about this time. I was invited last time and could not make it, but I don't know about this time. I haven't heard from them lately.
I mean, I would love to. So I know Doug well. I'm speaking. I think you should absolutely be 100% in Monerotopia. And I'll tell you what, there are a bunch of cryptos there. Like, and there is actually, I heard your story with Monero, which I actually, I did not know that. And I'm kind of like, whoa, what am I, walking into here? But I will say, people are actually starting to work together. And I think I think a lot of people have identified one or two of the really bad actors, and that's, no longer part of the situation. But like Zano and Firo and Monero and a whole bunch of other cryptos. And a lot of these people are actually now starting to work together. And what I've said is a couple of things. One, what I'm telling you right now, I'm trying to say, guys, I like Monero, but Monero can't do 1.8 million transactions per second. And so it's just like, let's stop this. Like, let's look at what we are all competing against, one thing. And this is what that one thing does. So you may think that your one thing is incrementally better than the other thing, but it is not minimally viable compared to the thing that we're actually all competing against. So let's just say, why don't we all work together? And I want to do a workshop or a panel or something on, and this is, I love your thoughts on this. Like, we have to sell privacy. And I never thought, So I've always assumed privacy kind of as a right for forever, right? And I've kind of
Yes.
taken for granted that people do not think that way. And I saw that Gen Z in particular, there was this Cato thing where 33% of Gen Z are okay with a surveillance camera, federal government surveillance camera in the home to monitor for domestic violence.
It's pretty crazy.
So like there's weird thing where older people appreciate privacy but aren't good with tech. Younger people are good with tech but don't appreciate privacy. And I'm kind of like, okay, Monero, I can we not do the Guy Fawkes mask thing? Can we actually maybe start looking at it like this?
Mm-hmm.
Every product that people are buying right now will be in the dark market at some point. So the food that you buy, if you buy red meat, that's going to be dark market. Raw milk, organic vegetables, you're not going to be able to buy those things. And make this more of a broader appeal on private, make privacy great again, I guess. But try to get some consensus around that. Maybe we can work together to market not being this niche renegade thing, and instead being something that everybody should have privacy. You could decide whether it's by default or optional, but at a minimum, people should have the option for privacy.
That's why I really enjoy the work of Naomi Brockwell on this, because she's one of the best privacy educators in the space, but also has found a way to make that voice reach people who otherwise wouldn't be. And as you mentioned, like her video content, or mainstream video content, I should say, resonates mostly with boomers, because those are the people who care about privacy. However, her TikTok channel / short form video stuff with little skits that kind of get the message across pretty quickly are becoming very popular with the young 20s female demographic. And I think that there are a lot of cases where certain generations have just grown up in a much more surveilled environment. It's much more open, and they're just much more used to everything being public, and they kind of want to be seen in some ways. But then there's always a drawback. And as long as you have that choice, I think that when you come to using like alternative monies like this, I think that at some point, the prospect of alternative money actually mattering is inexorably tied with some level of privacy, where if this has zero privacy, and this is something that there are some blockchain projects that, maybe I won't name to, try to throw shade on them, but some very good projects that are decentralized and let people do sovereign things, and it's great. But the privacy is just so bad that if you start trying to live alternatively on this, someone's going to see, it's going to be trivial to see everything you're doing. And yeah, so there we go. So at some point, maybe you don't have to convince people of privacy. Maybe you convince people of freedom money, and you just make sure privacy is a feature that's included in that, so people don't have to think about two things. Like, do I care about financial sovereignty, or do I care about privacy as well? They just care about sovereignty, and then they get the privacy along with the ride.
Yep. I agree with that. Actually, what I'm doing right now, I'm actually messaging Doug about, I think it would be great if you and Naomi were both there. Like, I do feel like there's momentum growing for this, and I would like to see Dash in the Cake wallet.
Yeah, same.
So have you talked to Vic?
Yeah, he's a little standoffish on that stuff, and maybe we could talk a little bit more about the particulars offline and stuff. But ultimately,
okay. All right, yeah.
I'd like to see everything everywhere. I've used Monero a couple times this year. I obviously have used Zcash quite a bunch as well. Use Litecoin, use Bitcoin Cash. I use endless numbers of different things, and obviously, and that's the thing with it's just like a side note, I guess, right? That when you become a user, I think that it doesn't really matter. You use whatever tool works, and a lot of the crypto space, not so much of like the sovereignty space, because when there were the crypto user space in New Hampshire in the earlier days, when people were very much not knowledgeable about tokens or different chains or attached to them, they just were very heavy into the usage and they just didn't care. You kind of find a world where now a lot of people get competitive because they get attached to the token and its price and its supremacy, and it's not just a tool that they use. I mean, I'm sure we all have our own like preferences and biases and things, but like in a world where I have to use Litecoin and Litecoin alone, I'd be very happy with that world. It might not be my favorite world, but it's a great world. Same thing with Monero, same thing with almost anything. Even to a certain extent, if you had to use something like Tether on Arbitrum, that's a lot more like sketchy. But as long as like there's another Tether in case Tether starts censoring me, that I could start using that instead. But like as long as we just get off that the legacy fiat rails, I mean, I think that's one thing that really works out.
Well, yeah, and so for me, and what I put in my book and what I talk about is, I'm trying to find a subset that have privacy, but that they have to have fees that are competitive. So it really narrows it down. But I would like, so Dash is on my kind of recommended list, and I use Dash along with some others. And so we'll talk offline. But it would be great to see Dash in Cakewallet, because what I'm trying to do, here's the thing: when you onboard new people, people do not want multiple wallets.
Yeah.
Boomers are not interested in DeFi, and nor are merchants do not want to deal with any of this stuff. And that doesn't mean that DeFi is bad. It just means that, look, a merchant just wants to have a payment mechanism, that they want to be able to take more payments. They would like to get outside of the system, but they also don't want to spend a lot of time or a lot of complexity on it. And so I think it'd be good to, I'd like to see Dash in it, because I think it meets that criteria. And again, I keep on trying to tell everybody, when they ratchet that up, we have to onboard people in a hurry. And as much as we went through the pain of BTC in 2017, right now, if there was some fear-based situation and we had to onboard a whole bunch of people in an emergency, we're going to need multiple coins, and all of those coins need to be actually continually expanding capacity, even if they don't need it yet. And it's hard to like get people on board with that. And I try to figure out how to describe it, and I'm getting better at it. But there is a way to kind of, well, that's why I wrote the book, which, by the way, needs to be completely rewritten. But at the same time, once you compare not crypto versus crypto, but this entire space to CBDCs, if people can understand that, then we should be like innovating furiously. Like we should be really engaged, not just with my coin's better than your coin. We should be like, oh my God, like Manhattan Project. Everybody should be doing Manhattan projects within their own cryptos.
Yeah, absolutely.
If they understood what was going on with the centralized approach.
Well, the good thing about that, I mean, there's enough people who are tirelessly working on a lot of cool stuff. And like I'm working on some side projects to significantly overhaul the privacy and user experience of privacy in Dash as well. And I think there's a lot of things moving in the right direction. But I think your example of the introducing developers to boomers is a great kind of thing, because people inherently trust firsthand knowledge more than anything. And there's a massive disconnect between like developers, business people, marketers, and end users. And to a certain extent, what I've been doing is not so much of some of it is like just a fun lifestyle choice or whatever. Like I hate fiat, so I don't want to use it. But a lot of it is just because otherwise I don't know things. It's the only way to know things is when you use it yourself, you run into the actual constraints, and then you take that to developers. And like one of these things I'll give an example of is what I call the Fezziwig bug, because there's a merchant in Portsmouth, New Hampshire that currently does not accept crypto because their accountant ended up convincing him against it in the long run. But there was a certain bug in the Dash wallet that no one had discovered in years and years, that I discovered, that had something to do with, because that place was filled with glass, whenever I'd walk in, there would be a brief moment where it would get kicked off of like the data network of the phone would get knocked off, and it would transfer to Wi-Fi. And when doing that and attempting to make a payment under a very certain condition of time would cause the wallet to just crash. And I kept on saying, like, this is a problem. And they're like, what bug? What are you talking about? And after so many bug reports and things, it's like, oh, okay, we found it. And it's one of those things you just would never know. Another thing, of course, so for example, if you, the way, and I know some Monero wallets have routed around this, but if you have Monero in one chunk in your wallet and you spend it, it works. And then if you try to spend it again, you have to wait for a while because the change that comes back, you have to get a certain amount of confirmations. And I believe it was Monerujo that has a special thing called like pocket change that splits it so you have a second thing to spend. So the odds of you having to go pay and three times in a short period of time is just very low. But yeah, there's all these kinds of things. It took a long time. Zcash wallets for a while had some serious problems, and they're relatively fixed now. But one of the problems, they needed to be fully synced in order to spend, and it was very long and intensive to sync them. And if you used it every single week, it would sync relatively quickly. But if you skipped a couple weeks, you're waiting to pay a merchant, you can't pay your money. So one of these things that was developed was something called spend before sync, where as long as your wallet knows you had those funds at some point, you can spend them while it's still syncing. And so all these little things that just kind of, you have to get out there to actually experience. I think that they are very important.
They are, and so, but the thing is, that's all it takes. There's no mystery behind this. So I mean, if I've done, if I've got 15 more workshops, each one of those is a learning experience. And I went through enough learning experiences where I'm like, okay, I need 3 months to incorporate what I've learned, because I don't want to go out and do. It's not that the last workshop was bad, but I'm like, okay, I'm gonna have to go back to those people again because I gave them a fractional solution. And that's fine. Everybody that's done the workshop, the whole point of this is, I mean, I'm doing this as a nonprofit. So I'm not, if I cover my costs, that's great of doing the workshops. The whole point on this is for people to use this. If people don't end up using this, then I'm wasting my time. And so, but I think I know what the next minimum viable product will be, and then we'll see. And, I guarantee you this, I will not be 100% right. And that's fine. As long as you take that approach of, okay, well, whatever, mistakes are they're not really mistakes. They're learning experiences along the way. If you have an open approach to it. And I really think the more we can do this and iterate in rapid suggestion, but I want more coins involved. Like I want more, this is why I sent a thing to Doug. I would love if you were at Monerotopia and even Naomi as well. I would love it if we could all just, agree to work together on offering solutions, because I know that the consumer does not want multiple wallets, and I know the merchant does not want, certainly multiple. You know how it was early on. So somebody's like, hey, I've got Bitcoin Cash, and the owner's like, cool, I'll take Bitcoin Cash, and then boom, you're on a website. And then, 6 months later, somebody comes in and says, hey, I want to pay with Bitcoin Cash. The owner's not there. And, the person working behind the desk is like, what? So we got to get beyond that. But it's doable. And particularly if everybody understood that we got to work together, then I actually think it would be great. I'd love to see these workshops where it's so this last workshop I was at, we gave people Monero and Xano with CakePay, and I don't have a point of sale yet. I haven't actually put that into the workshop. But I mean, I'd love to have a situation where we're giving multiple currencies. Like I'd love to see a situation where Dash and Bitcoin Cash and Monero and Xano are there, and then even actually having people from each of those projects there, so that we can all I mean, if we move away from this coin versus this coin, and we just say, hey, look, why don't we all get together and use these workshops as a market research for all of it? If we could agree to do that, we would speed up by 5 years actual usability of this stuff, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so. And for me, at least, that's the obvious path forward. So yeah, let's keep on hacking towards that. So if people want to find out about what you're doing and get involved with this whole thing, where's the best place you'd want to direct them?
Best place is daylightfreedom.org. That's the main website. And then I'm on X at Aaron R. Day. For now, for as long as that continues, hopefully that will continue. That's where I'm at. And I would like to just mention this Free Roger thing, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
I've launched a petition kind of similar to the Free Ross petition. So if folks don't know, and actually people don't know, or a lot of people don't know, Roger Ver has now been in Spain for almost 6 months, and he was arrested in April. It's a multi-year. He exited the United States. He expatriated in 2014. He had some tax issues, and then they seemed to go away. And then all of a sudden, like 3 weeks after publishing Hijacking Bitcoin, he gets arrested in Spain. He was actually put in the same prison that John McAfee was in. McAfee spent
It's
8
quite
months
dubious.
there. He spent 8 months there, and he lost his final appeal for extradition, and then he died under mysterious circumstances 24 hours later. So Roger's there. He's silent. He can't talk, can't make any statements. Like, I've looked into this, because I've been through some legal stuff as well. If he speaks out, that could violate his bail. Like, that could actually be something that causes him to get thrown back. So imagine you've written this book exposing Bitcoin, and now you see all of these politicians promoting BTC. You see this HBO thing a week or so ago, which is an absolute travesty, and you literally can't say anything about it. And meanwhile, he's been offered no ability to settle. And he actually paid tax. He hired accountants, hired lawyers. And again, this was at a time where we didn't know what Bitcoin was. Mt. Gox had collapsed. The space was kind of a joke. And yet he went to the trouble of actually trying to pay his taxes. So I guess no good deed goes unpunished. And so now nobody knows what's going on. And nobody knows who he is in a lot of cases. So I'm trying to raise awareness in a similar way. And I think he's looking for a pardon. And so, anything that we can do to raise the awareness could actually help him in that regard, because we're at this critical point. And I don't care which political party, this is not a Trump play or anything else. He should be pardoned simply because if they follow through with this, it will kill innovation, because then there's no incentive for anybody ever to innovate anything.
Yeah.
Because if even when you try to pay your taxes, they come back 10 years later and say, well, you didn't pay enough, but then they don't even tell you how much, and then they try to throw you in a cage. Who's going to invent anything in the United States? So this is a big issue. And so freerogernow.org is a website, and there's a link to the petition and a link with information, but I encourage everybody to sign it because it does actually help. I mean, Lynn Ulbricht, what she did for Ross worked, and it ultimately led to Trump coming out and saying he would commute Ross's sentence on day one. So this kind of that happened because of Lynn's love for her son and tenacity. So we all need to try to do the same thing for Roger.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Roger's been a kind of a hero of mine for a very long time. I had the pleasure of meeting him in person and communicating with him a lot over the years, and interviewing him because of, again, this book, not very long before, he ended up, again, temporarily losing his freedom. And I do a lot to get him out. So let's hope that happens. And yeah, it's a lot of uncertainty out there, but definitely that. So Daylight Freedom Foundation and Free Roger. And
freerogernow.org.
Yeah, cool. Well, thanks very much for being on and chatting about this. This has been very, very illuminating. There's a lot of similar synergies and things like that, but also the extent of the research that you've done into the CBDC world that gives it a lot more of a clearer target of what we're up against. I think it's a great thing to have. So yeah, thanks for educating everyone about that, and everyone, thanks for watching this, and it's been great. Thanks.